Alright, in this video we're going to be recreating a marsh with a kayaker fishing at sunset. As you see here, I'm estimating what are about 1/3 of the way across the page and up and down the page, and I'm using my other hand to guess. I'm using one hand to guess and the other hand to check because I'm using the rule of thirds in my composition. Now I'm starting with the sun centered on one of the intersections of those lines. I'm adding a tree line right beneath it, and a little bit beneath that top horizontal 1/3 line, I'm adding a shoreline where the trees are growing out of the ground. On the sides, I've added in kind of a zigzagging line that creates a sense of wavy river going down the marsh. So I've got some in and out effects on both sides. Really, it's important that we have some of those in and out effects. I make an elliptical shape with a couple little lines and a very vague sketch of a figure for my kayaker, and then I'm all set. In your project, you should erase the pencil lines that for the rule of thirds at least at this point before you color even. Now we're going to be using 2 layers of color over here on this whole thing. And you can see that I'm making the sunset first, and the colors of the sunset often run from very warm in the sun, like yellow, and then they run toward the cooler colors, so yellow becomes orange, becomes red, becomes violet, becomes blue, and then becomes black. And off on the far left-hand side, I added a little bit of a nice bright pink, which I'm thinking is going to become some clouds over time. Now in our tree line, we're using a scumbling texture, and I'm using a nice sort of foresty green as the base for that. I'm using a little more control over my texture right near the sun, and a little bit more erratic marks on the other sides. I'm going to start by filling in a bunch of the water with, again, just a base value here, and because we're making this water, we're coloring in a horizontal sort of wavy texture, making lines that overlap one another. You might notice that I made some ripples around where the lure came from the fishing rod and it entered the water. But I'm filling almost all of that whole area with a light pressure, light to medium pressure anyway, of a base value. And now we're onto the grass, and in the grass we are using vertical marks. Marks go mostly from low upward, just like grass grows out of the ground and it goes upward from the ground. We're also trying to make the grass longer, where it's lower on the page or closer to us, the viewer, and make the marks shorter as they get further away. I'm using a flat part of my pastel, and I'm putting a medium amount of pressure on here. Once I have my base layer everywhere finished, I'm going to go into blending. You might notice that at this stage, I'm doing a combination of blending with the grain and against the grain that I colored, against the direction. I'm trying to make sure the areas that I want filled are filled, and trying to make sure to control, for instance, avoiding covering the cloud up with other colors. I'm also trying to avoid adding any complementary colors, so making sure that I don't use a part of my blending stump that has blue pastel on it in the orange or yellow. When I move forward, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to blend the grass as well, and that also blends in the same direction as the marks that we made. We want to really keep some sense of the linear texture that we have here, and to make that work, we're blending in an upward motion. Clean your blending stump as needed. And again, using a wavy kind of directional mark for our water as we blend the base layer of that, just the same way that we colored it. We don't always want to blend in the same direction, but for both of these linear textures, it can be helpful. I left the blending of the tree line to last, not for any particular important reason, but because I wanted to capture the contours of the other 2 areas. Now I'm going in with my heavier pressure layer, filling everything really, really firmly. And as I do, I'm working from the darkest colors in the sky back toward the sun, and I almost always want to work from the furthest things away from us and then get progressively closer. So we start at the sky, which is infinitely far away, and then we'll work down and we'll go into the tree line, the water, and the grass as we go on. Now notice, at this stage, our heavy pressure layer has some real strong lines between the two colors, but in just a minute we're going to use our blending stump to soften those edges up. And at that time, as you'll see, we're going to blend in a different direction, across or in the circular mark. And here you can see we're using a white pastel and a blending stump, adding some lightness and texture to the clouds. We're going to clean our blending stump and use some dark green, some orange, some brown, and maybe some black. We're going to use mostly vertical lines with the brown, which indicate the actual trunks of the trees. We're going to darken up the top edge of the tree line. That's the area that's going to be seeming the darkest because that's where the shadow is illuminating it. But the sun is illuminating it, rather. We're using a really dark green for that. And then we're going to scumble in some black as well. Not quite as heavy as the green was, but we're adding plenty of it and more concentration of the black right near the sun. And then it's a little hard to tell what I'm doing here, but I am using a blending stump and smoothing that out. Not perfectly, we want to have still some texture. But trying to fill some of the gaps and the white spaces in between the sky color and the tree color. Now I'm showing you where the sunlight is going, and the reflections of the sun are going to be in a path right beneath the sun. They're as wide as the sun, and as they go lower down the page, they get wider. Those are at the tops of the waves, and so they're only intermittent. And we're using some more blue and filling in some of the lighter spaces. This is more of a medium blue, adding the middle tones of the water, but really trying to consistently fill in a nice looking way. We're really being careful around the light reflections so that we don't cover those and just make them all green. And now you can see for the kayak, I just colored in the ellipse and the small side attached to it, but I added a little light amount of black pastel to the side. This gives it a sense of shadow. Some people have trouble with the person, but it's a really simple shape. It's sort of an oval for a head and a chunky triangle with a couple little ovals attached, and then a long fishing rod. It's a lot easier than it might seem in your head. Now we're going to go in, we're going to finish up the grass. We're going to make 3 distinct layers in the grass, and we're going to use 3 distinct colors for it. We're going to keep the same base color, but we're using a sharper point and a heavier pressure. Now I'm using a good complementary kind of neutral green, greenish, brownish color here as one of my second colors. You can use a different color if you want. I just think that this pairing looks good. And I use a kind of medium dark brown as my third color mixed in here. With all of these, I'm coloring with a sharp point or the corner of a pastel. I'm using vertical lines. I'm using longer lines on the bottom of the page, and we'll get shorter lines as we go up. You can see here I'm repeating that process, but using more medium length lines, and I'll add shorter ones above that. At this point, I'm blending in the later layers of the grass, and something I want you to notice, we're blending in different ways. At the very farthest back, we blended much more aggressively and almost side to side to really get rid of some of that texture. In the middle section of grass, we blended only vertical in the same hand move that we colored with, so we still see the different strokes or the different individual blades of grass, but they're less crisp than on the bottom layer. And then the final layer, the very bottom bits of grass, we don't blend at all. And at this point, I'm feeling like I need to darken up my water a little bit, and I want to bring back those ripples from the lure. So I'm using a darker blue now, and I'm darkening it up, especially focused on areas that might be in shadow. And we're going to take that emphasis on the shadow even further. After we do some blending. We're trying to even out the colors, not completely, we still want to have some variety, but we want to make sure that all or almost all of the white spaces between things is filled. And we want a more pronounced waviness lower on the page, so we're kind of having a more flat texture as things are farther away, with more noticeable wavy lines lower down. You can see as I'm blending in around the light reflections of the sun that I'm really trying to get rid of the white spaces between, but not all of it. Now, we're going to add in some shadows here, and I'm using the blending stump to sort of indicate the side of any form that the light will hit first, because where the light hits first, there isn't shadow, but on the opposite side of that area, there is. We're going to darken up the water along the shoreline. We're going to add some darker, either dark brown or black, mixed in the same grassy texture. And then it's these little finishing touches that really make a big difference. So notice how we're only having those shadows on the back side of chunks of land. We're really making sure that the front side of things don't have shadows, because why would they? They're right in front of the sun. And that's all.